Hello everyone, welcome to another recorded discussion in Assessment and Learning 1. And for this chapter, we will be learning about distinguishing, constructing various paper and pen type of tests. But for this video, we will focus particularly on the construction of table of specification. And here are the learning outcomes. At the end of this video, you are expected to identify key parts of table of specification and construct table of specification based on your major sheet. And here is the end goal question. How do we achieve constructive alignment in making pen and paper type of test? So in this regard, we are going to answer this hopefully at the end of this recorded discussion. Now, in an ideal setup, we plan first the test properly based on the learning competency through constructing a table of specification. So it is always a must that by principle that we start with making the table of specification before we create the test questions, since we will be guided with whatever is in the table of specification that we have planned to create for the test question. And here is the important step. We identify the test objective or the lesson outcomes or the learning competency we have in Matatag curriculum, for example. And then we decide on what type of objective type to be used. So whether it will be selected response or constructed response. Selected if we want to make a multiple choice, matching type, alternate response type of questions. And constructed if we want to have a short answer, a identification, or a completion test, or it could be through essay. And we prepare the table of specification. We construct the draft items and we try out and validation. That means to say we test the validity and the reliability of the test questionnaire. For this recorded discussion, we will only be focusing on the first three steps, starting with identifying test objectives or lesson outcomes. So remember that the word used is identify. That means to say we have to identify it from the curriculum existing in the ed setup. For example, in the Matatag curriculum. So that means to say, we do not create it. We just need to identify it based on what we have delivered. So the rule of the thumb is that we do not include learning objective or learning outcomes if we were not able to deliver it in the classroom instruction. And if it has to be comprehensive, then it should follow various levels of revised Bloom's taxonomy. That means it should not just lean on the remembering and understanding items, but it should also have, if possible, the exam or the test question should have, your exam should have evaluating and creating. Each objective outlines the desired outcomes, ideally for the students. So that's why we review, by identifying the test or lesson outcome, we review each type of objective that will fall under what level of revised Bloom's taxonomy. First start with here. We have a learning objective that says the student must be able to identify the subject and the verb in the given sentence. This will only fall in the remembering skill of the learner because this only focuses on the recall of basic knowledge. Here we have, in the understanding level, the student determined the correct form of the verb based on the subject. So this measures now a comprehension. They have to recall what are the different forms of verb before they can appropriately determine what is used in that sentence. In applying level, students write sentences following the subject-verb agreement rules. So in this regard, we can have it could be a short answer or a conclusion sentence in which they're going to write or they're going to show their ability to use knowledge in real life situations. For analyzing, students break down a sentence into a subject and a predicate. This involves now examining parts of relationship. For evaluating, students judge whether a sentence follows a subject-verb agreement rule. So this requires a critical thinking ability. In this case, a good question may be through identifying whether we provide them the item, and then they identify whether it is a sentence has observed the rules in subject-verb agreement. And for the highest form in creating, students now formulate their own rules about subject-verb agreement, if they can, based on following the subject-verb agreement rule. So those are, again, just an example of how we can identify whether that objective will fall under remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, or creating level of the revised Bloom's taxonomy. Now, deciding on what type of objective test will be used. In this regard, remember that when we say objective test, the student will just have a one answer expected. Now, I also included here the subjective type of test in which we can have the essay, the completion exam, for example, the constructed response in which the essay and the problem solving. So, for here we have different levels in the table, and we have the description of cognitive skill we are expecting our students to acquire, and there is a suggested test of type of test. So for remembering, we can have an item that has a matching type or true or false. That would also depend on the ability of our learner, the level of our learner. A purpose of assessment is to measure students' ability to remember previously learned information. So for understanding, we can also have matching type, true or false, or modify, or multiple choice. And applying is can also have the same. However, we can also use applying in essay and problem solving. For analyzing, it should not just be a simple true or false. We can have the modified true or false, in which a subject or a sentence should be an applied sentence, but not just a definition sentence. Because if, for example, we're going to give them a definition sentence and they're just going to identify whether what makes the sentence incorrect, that is just a simple true or false. It does not fall on the analyzing part. A modified true or false that is being asked, that is an example here, is that one that requires an application and one that requires student to break down the sentence or that particular example if it is really an example or an application of what is being taught. Or multiple choice. We can also have in analyzing type of test in a multiple choice questions. And of course, the problem solving, for example, the proving examples or proving questions, and of course the essay, in which they're going to we have a question and then they're going to summarize or give a summary of what they have learned, or post their the breakdown of what they have learned, or the analysis of what they have learned through essay. Now, for evaluating, here we can have essay. We can also have a multiple choice in the evaluating part given the choices, but it should be more of a real life situations. It was not just included here, but yes, we can also have evaluating questions in multiple choice type of test. And of course, for creating, Remember that we cannot make a multiple choice item or even a selected response type of test in a creating level. The word there is create. So there should be a production of new or original piece of what they have learned. So a good example that we can do, we can only ask them to do, is through essay. Example, they can make their own, or it could also be through enumeration, but with justification, or that will still fall under constructed response. For example, they're going to cite their own ways of doing such things. So that could fall under creating. Their own ways means to say that not the one that they have understood in the text or not the one that they have understood in the reference book, but those that they created in their own. They created in themselves, given that they have learned those basic levels of cognitive domain. So please let us understand that in most cases, a standardized test, we can actually have a very good one that would create a higher reliability is the multiple choice questions. However, we can also sort into using other type. For example, what I'm trying to say is that we can have a true or false through multiple choice. We can also have a matching type through multiple choice. It's just that how we construct it properly. And that would be another topic that we will have after this recorded discussion. Now, here are the recommended time for test item. This is based on the newest study by Kenneth in 2025. So remember that when we decide, this is still part of deciding what type of test will be provided, should be provided to our students. So we remember this general could be a recommended recommendation for all who will be making the test questionnaires. So please remember that for multiple choice, if it is just a basic recall up until understanding, a student may answer it 30 seconds to 45 seconds. Or it could also be for multiple choice with high stake that would involve applying, analyzing, and evaluating. Then they could answer it to 45, that would ranges to 45 to 60 plus seconds. For short answers, such as, for example, identification, a completion type of test, in other words, they just have to complete the sentence, that would be 1 to 2 minutes. For problem solving or computation, that would take them 2 to 5 minutes. For essay short, that's 10 to 15 minutes. For essay extended, which is an open type of this is used more on in creating part, they can answer it in 20 to 40 minutes. So with this number of minutes, it should be considered, it should be part of your consideration in the making of your table of specification, because it will identify, it should be included, because you will have to identify how many items should there be. And part of our decision making is how many minutes they will be able to answer it. That's included because usually the exam is only given for 1 or 1 to 2 hours for a paper and pen type of test. Now, let us now move forward to the example of table of specification. So we are now in the third step, which is preparing a table of specification itself. So remember that TOS is a test map or a blueprint that guides the teacher in constructing a test. So that means to say, we create this before creating the TQ, right? So TOS should ensure that there's a balance. This is used to make sure that there is a balance between lower level thinking skills and of those of the higher order thinking skills. And we can create this through what we call normal curve, okay? So this here is an example of a prototype of a table of specification. So in this regard, the one that is included is the objective, as you can see, not the topic, because we are applying the outcome-based education. And the number of items is included, the total number of items at saka the percentage as well. Now, there is another example also. There's another frame or format of a TOS that goes like this. No RBT level. However, there is objective, number of days or hours, number of items, percentage of items, and item placement. This is usually used for if the TOS needs to identify how many hours. This may be a tedious type of TOS. However, this will guide the teacher as to make in making a proportional items for those learning objective that was provided or that was delivered depending on the given time. So here, again, for the objective, it should be a learning competency. For the number of hours, here, usually, we have this in the curriculum map or in the syllabus. How many contact hours do we have for that specific topic? That is still a part of mapping. And for the number of items, it is dependent on the number of days it is created. So the simple formula would be the number of items is equivalent to hours for that certain competency divided by the total hours times the total test items. So for example, we accumulated 8 hours for all the competencies, and the test or the exam should have 50 items. So you allocate items based on the time spent on each competency. For example, what I mean is that, let's say for that learning competency there is 1 hour. So 1 hour, 1 over 8 hours, that's 1.1251%. And that means times 50, we multiply that by 50 because the 50 is the target items, total items, we get 6.25. So since, of course, there is no 0.25 items, we assign 6 items to that learning competency. So again, it's what we call proportionality. So that means to say, if that learning competency is delivered more than 2 hours, then that should get more than 12 items. So the higher the more hours spent for that taught in that learning competency, then the more items should be given or should be made. That's in the idea that you do not ask questions or you do not include questions that was not given in or that was not delivered in the classroom. So here for the percentage of items, 6 items over 50, that would be 12%. And of course, item number, the item placement means to say the item number in the wiki. Now, this is another example as well. This one is without the number of if we're going to use a TOS without the number of items or the number of questions, then we need to have a TOS that follow a normal curve. In other words, it is progressing from lower order to higher order thinking skills with a greater concentration on the middle levels, particularly on the applying and on the analyzing. But take note that will still depend on the learning competency that we have. Okay, but that would be the limitation of this type of TOS. So this ensures actually a balanced assessment that measures both basic and deeper understanding. And here is an example of that. So here, it may not be as the numbers of each learning outcomes or the number of hours this thought might be missing, but this somehow follows what we call a normal curve, a representation of a normal curve. So this exam only has a multiple choice items. That's why the creating part is 0. There's no essay, there's no problem solving, but all are in multiple choice, 100 items. So in this regard, there's 10% for remembering, 20% for understanding, 28% for the applying, and 25% for the analyzing, and 17% for the evaluating. This somehow resembles a close to normal curve type of exam. So you can, in our class discussions, we will be using this type of TOS. And the next video will focus on the drafting of the test questionnaires. Thank you, and see you again on the next recorded discussion.